Good afternoon. Welcome to Africa and Economy, the program that goes beyond the numbers to unpack what's driving business and finance in Africa today. Markets are in motion, policies are shifting, companies are adapting. That is why we are here to bring you the stories behind it all. I am Wang Fonabasi. Walter, here's what we have in store for you. Senegal and Kenya signed deal permitting visa-free travel for citizens of both nations. Dangote plans refinery upgrade to dethrone India and lead the global refining market. South African inflation rates rises less than expected. 27 African nations placed among the world's highest financing and commercial risk economies. Now let's shift the focus to the US dollar, how it is performing relative to African currencies and the broader African market. Let's take a look at the US dollars, how it is performing against other African currencies. I apologize for that. And now let's go to the next concern. South Africa's annual inflation rate ticked up to 3.4% in September 2025 from 3.3% in August, slightly below market's forecast of 3.5%. It remains within the official South African Reserve Bank's target range of 3 to 6%. Price growth accelerated primarily for housing and utilities, largely on account of electricity and gas and water supply, restaurant and hotels at 3% and 2.6%, and miscellaneous goods and services at 2.8% and 2.6%. At the same time, transportation costs declined at a slower pace of 0.1% and 1.4%, of which fuels at 2.2% and 5.7%. Meanwhile, food prices at 4.5% and 5.2% recorded the smallest increase in 5 months. The core inflation rates, which excludes food, non-alcoholic beverages, fuel and energy, each up to a 7-month high of 3.2% in September 2025 from 3.1% in the prior month. On a monthly basis, the CPI rose by 0.2% in September, following a 0.1% decrease in the prior month. Still in southern part of Africa, South Africa is once again under international scrutiny after reports surfaced that 4 Aerospatiale Gazelle helicopters exported from the country have ended up in Libya, allegedly violating the UN's arms embargo on the North African nation. The aircrafts, reportedly linked to General Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army, were exported on the civilian registration, raising serious questions about the country's arms control enforcement and its growing reputation as a hub for controversial weapons transfers. According to reports, the helicopters, originally military variants used by the British and French armies, were demilitarized, imported into South Africa and re-registered as civilian aircraft. The South African registration numbers, including ZUR00 and ZURZR, allowed them to skirt the stringent oversight of the National Conventional Arms Control Committee, which regulates military export. The aircraft were reportedly cleared for Jordan but diverted mid-route to Benghazi, the LNA stronghold, following a refueling stop in Nairobi, Kenya. Flight records indicate that at least one Belarusian-operated Elysian II-76 cargo plane managed by Transavia Export Airlines was involved in the transfers. Democratic Alliance Member of Parliament Chris Heiting has demanded answers from Minister in the Presidency Khumbudzo Vavini, who oversees the NCACC. Senegal and Kenya have signed a deal permitting visa-free travel for citizens of both nations, fostering diplomatic ties. The agreement allows visa-free visit for a duration of 90 days, benefiting tourism, business and cultural exchange. President William Ruto of Kenya and Bassirou Diomaye Faye of Senegal witnessed the signing of the agreement. Kenya aims to enhance African integration by implementing visa-free policies for approximately 55 African countries. Now, the agreement between the two countries signifies a major step towards fostering stronger diplomatic ties and facilitating greater mobility for their citizens. Meanwhile, Kenya currently stands as one of Africa's countries pushing for the full integration of a borderless Africa. In January, the East African country announced plans to make its borders visa-free for at least 55 African countries. Furthermore, members of the East African community, which includes Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, will be allowed to stay up to 6 months in accordance with the regional bloc's policies. Prior to Kenya's announcement, only 5 African countries allowed visa-free travel to nationals of other African countries: Ghana, Rwanda, Seychelles, Gambia and Benin. However, the country which currently boasts the 10th strongest passport in Africa noted that its visa-free initiative aligns with the goals of promoting visa openness among African nations and facilitating smoother cross-border transactions and business activities. We'll go on a break, and when we return, African economy continues. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us, and now to the rest of the stories. This is still African Economy, your business program. Dangote Group, under the leadership of Aliko Dangote, announced an expansion plan for its Dangote Petroleum Refinery. The refinery, currently operating at around 650,000 barrels per day, is undergoing upgrades aimed at reaching 700,000 barrels per day by the end of 2025. Additionally, the latest commentary reveals ambitions to ultimately raise capacity to 1.4 million barrels per day, which, if realized, would make it the world's largest single-train refinery, surpassing the facility in Jamnagar, India. And to help us unpack the fiscal and regulatory implications of this major expansion by Dangote Group, we are joined by a tax consultant, Mr. Emmanuel Ifeanyi. Mr. Emmanuel Ifeanyi, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Hello, Mr. Emmanuel Ifeanyi.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Hello, Mr. Emmanuel Ifeanyi.
Hello, I can hear you properly. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so what are your thoughts on the tax and fiscal environment around a large-scale refinery expansion like this one by Dangote Group in Nigeria, especially given the scale and ambition of lifting capacity from 650,000 barrels per day towards 1.4 million barrels per day?
Thank you very much for that question. Okay, so I'll start from the upscaling of the refinery, right? From 50,000 barrels per day to 1.4 million. To me, is actually an audacious and transformative, move by Dangote Refinery, right? Because if this is realized, I mean, we are all aware that it will surpass the Indian's refinery, and it will position Nigeria as a global refining house, right? And I mean, Nigeria could then become a net exporter of refined products, right? And that will actually reshape Africa's energy trade. It will also enhance, foreign exchange earning, and probably reduce import dependency and stabilize, our regional fuel supply. So for me, it's an audacious and transformative movement by Dangote Refinery. Looking at the tax implication, right? As you are aware, the Tax Act 2025 actually introduced some sort of a performance-based incentive, right, that replaces that form of a blanket tax holiday that is currently what we have now, right, to a performance-based incentive that is measurable, right? But yet again, in as much as we would have a corporate tax exposure, maybe for Dangote, we don't need to forget the fact that he actually operates in a free zone, territory. And so the exposure is actually limited to, probably his business within the custom territory, right? And so when we are looking at the fiscal outlook, right, we might expect some form of tighter compliance or, bureaucratic a framework, right, for him, but that is to an extent that he operates outside the free zone entity. Thank you.
Right there. Now, looking ahead, how might the expansion affect Nigeria's government revenue streams, both maybe indirect and indirect taxes?
All right, thank you very much. So like I mentioned, right, earlier on, Dangote actually operates in a free zone enterprise, right? And so the impact, right, in terms of direct taxes, let's say for corporate income tax or probably VAT, right, which are direct taxes, that is to an extent to which he actually operates outside the free zone entity, right? Because as you are aware, what the law currently provides is that if you operate within the free zone entity and then, you're exempted from all taxes, right, as the law currently provides, right? But again, there's an exemption that if you operate outside the free zone entity, you're then liable to some form of tax. So, the expansion actually could, bring about some form of expanded tax, how do I put it? Expanded tax net for the government, right? Because if you operate outside the free zone entity, then he's liable to some form of tax, with respect to maybe the corporate income tax and VAT. And if we are looking at the indirect taxes, right, we can also look at some sectors, that actually affiliate with him, right? For example, maybe the maritime, the logistics, and, the retail sectors, right? The ordinary fuel stations, right? They are actually operating, with the name of the company and they are liable to taxes, right? And so that could be some form of, the indirect tax that this could actually, provide for the government. Again, we don't have to look away from the employment of thousands of employees who actually pay to the government. That's actually a huge one for the government, right? So when we want to look at the policy shift, we need to look at in terms of maybe the upstream and the downstream sector, we need to look at the incentive that I've earlier mentioned, right? We also need to look at a very transformative tax rate, which is the capital gains tax being revised from 10% to about 30%, as the case may be. I think I've done justice to this. Thank you.
Thank you. So, having looked at Dangote's Ambition refinery expansion, let's now shift our focus to the state oil company and the severe challenges facing its finances. Now, the NNPCL has reported a dramatic decline in its financial performance. Its profit after tax fell to 216 billion naira in September 2025, representing a roughly 71% drop from the 748 billion naira posted 6 months earlier in April. Revenue also dropped from around 4.655 trillion naira in August to 4.269 trillion naira in September. Now, the decline is attributed to a lower crude oil and gas production and disruptions such as the 3-day strike given by the oil workers. Given NNPC's significant role in Nigeria's economy, what are your initial impressions of the company's recent financial performance and its potential impact on the national fiscal landscape?
So if you ask for my first impression, I would say there is some form of a rising expense, right, that is actually eroding the profit margin. Because if you look at the revenue, right, the revenue is about 4.2 trillion, right, and you are having a profit of about 216 billion. The margin is so wide, right, and I could attribute it to some form of a capital expenditure that is actually eroding the profit margin. And we cannot shy away from saying that statutorily, right, payments to the federal account will be declining. That is the truth, because if they don't make enough profit, obviously they won't remit to the government enough profit. And so the government may need to diversify revenue sources, to accelerate non-oil tax profits, right? So we'll look at some other sectors and see how the government can actually generate more revenue from that aspect. Because if this keep declining, it means that the government will not be able to meet up with some of its obligations, in terms of carrying out some capital projects, in the country. And so I would think that the government have to diversify and look, further, beyond just oil revenue to non-oil revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. In your own, let's take this last one, please. In your opinion, how might NNPCL's financial challenges influence future tax policies or incentives within the oil and gas sector?
When we look at the shrinking profitability, that is currently being posted, the government could look at incentivizing that sector further again, because as it stands, when you look at the incentive that the PPTA currently provides, there is another one in the CIT, with respect to gas operation. There is another one in the PIA, right, with respect to gas operation. So there are a lot of incentives again, but again, I would think that the government could, put this incentive further, right, to incorporate maybe some other aspect, right, that is actually, making the profit margin to actually decline, right? Also, compliance pressure, right? If you look at what we currently have, like the FRS, right, is actually outperforming the oil-linked agencies like the NNPC as it. And a shift again, from the oil revenue that we used to have and to non-oil revenue, right? Because if an agency that is a non-oil agency is actually generating huge profit, more than what an oil revenue agency is generating, then we need to look at a policy shift. We need to look at how we could maximize, the other sector to ensure that, we balance the system. So the strategic direction for me, future tax policies should likely balance investment incentive, and ensure there is a fiscal accountability among the various sectors, especially in the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel Ifeanyi, for contributing your quota. We do hope that the NNPCL in due time would come up with a positive response. Thank you so much for joining us once again on the program.
Thank you.
Microscope as 27 African countries have been ranked in the highest risk category for short-term financing and commercial vulnerability, according to a report. The findings released in the third quarter of 2025 revealed how fragile liquidity conditions and disruptions in trade continue to expose the emerging markets, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa, to global economic shocks. In practical terms, this means businesses in high-risk countries are more likely to face payment delays, credit constraints, or reduced access to international capital market. According to report, 90 countries are categorized as low risk, reflecting strong access to global financing and stable payment systems, while 57 countries fall into the high risk zone, 27 of which are African. Now, this positions Africa as the region most exposed to potential liquidity pressures and short-term disruptions in trade and demand. Now, the report highlights that high-risk countries are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of the Middle East, and conflict-affected regions such as Ukraine, Syria, and Sudan. In Africa, economies such as Ghana, Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Zimbabwe are grappling with rising debt levels, volatile exchange rate, and limited access to international capital. Many of these economies have also faced multiple headwinds since 2022, including tightening global financial conditions, currency depreciation, and lower investor confidence. On the screen are the 27 African countries ranked among world's highest financing and commercial risk economies. Top on the list is Burkina Faso, followed by Burundi. Third is Central African Republic, followed by Chad, Congo, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea. 8th is Eritrea. 9th is Ethiopia. 10th is Gambia, Ghana, They rank high. That's according to the financial risk. At 12 is Guinea, 13 is Guinea-Bissau, amongst others. African mobile leaders at MWC Kigali renewed calls to remove taxes on smartphones priced below $100 to improve internet access. Global System for Mobile Communications Association, GSMA, says $40, I beg your pardon, phones could connect 20 million more Africans, while $30 devices could link 50 million. Rwanda's 4G subscribers have surged tenfold under government reforms, connecting thousands of schools and health centers. Asian Telecom plans to expand 4G coverage to 95% of Africa's population by 2027, backed by major international financing. Speaking before over 4,000 participants from government, business and technology sectors, the GSMA, representing 6 leading mobile operators, reiterated its call for African government to remove import duties and value-added taxes on entry-level smartphones priced below $100. According to GSMA, intelligent affordable smartphones could significantly expand connectivity. Devices priced around $40 could bring mobile internet to 20 million more people, while $30 phones could connect an additional 50 million in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's a wrap for today's edition of African Economy. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow us across all our social media channels at Spectrum TV Live. Remember, African Economy airs live every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30 p.m. I am Wangfona Basi Walter. Until next time, keep thinking growth, keep thinking progress, because this is where Africa Economy speaks. Goodbye, Africa.